provisional government plan to establish air force. Koreans to have aviation field.
근데 이제 그쪽에서 해외들에게 편하지도 않아서 어쨌든 이거는 러시아에서 이 사람 그냥 뭐 이런 거 못하는
Go. Nancy.
Following the March First movement in 1919, many independence army units were formed in Jiandao, and they actively engaged in armed struggle for independence. The Independence Army won victory battles in Onsong, Sangdong-jia, Fengwudong, and other areas, striking a blow to the Japanese army. Threatened by the Independence Army, Japan established the plan for genocide of Koreans in Jiandao and dispatched troops there. This includes as many as 20,000 troops. Besieged by the Japanese army, the Independence Army units moved to the Baekdu Mountain area for a battle. The Independence Army units arrived at the Baekdu Mountain area, Irdagu and Sangdagu in Heilong County in Jilin Province, and the Qingshanli area. Hence the battle is called the Battle of Qingshanli. The Battle of Qingshanli was fought over 6 days beginning on October 21st, 1920. The Northern Military Administration Office Army led by Kim Jua-jin and the Unified Forces of Independence Armies led by Hong Bom-do fought around 10 battles in the Qingshanli region, including the Beiyongping, Wonglagu, Kwansuping, and Yulang Town. The situation became urgent. The Northern Military Administration Office Army and the Unified Forces of Independence Armies led by Hong Bom-do were being rapidly besieged by the Japanese troops. The Japanese forces entering the Qingshanli region consisted of 5,000 men. In Beiyongping, on October 21st, 1920, the Northern Military Administration Office Army was waiting in ambush in a valley with a waterfall. The Japanese forces entered the valley not knowing that the ambush awaited them, and the Independence Army fired at them. The battle ended after about 30 minutes with over 200 Japanese soldiers annihilated. On the following day, the Unified Forces led by Hong Bom-do won a victory over the Japanese forces by counterplotting the enemy's strategy. The Unified Forces led by Hong Bom-do noticed that the Japanese forces were besieging them in front and in back, and distributed the Japanese forces with a hit-and-run strategy. The Unified Forces attacked the Japanese unit once and escaped. The Japanese forces approached each other from opposite directions, not knowing that the Unified Forces had escaped, fired at each other. When the Japanese forces were in chaos, the Unified Forces attacked from behind and won a great victory. It was cold and hunger that afflicted the Independence Army most, and yet, everywhere they went, they were met with the warm compassion by Koreans. Miraculously, we fought and broke a siege. Residents gave rice balls to us when we were fighting without food and clothing. Patriotic ladies threw rice balls taken from their skirts to us when bullets were falling like rain, which encouraged the Independence Army. Meanwhile, the Northern Military Administration Office Army had won a battle at Beiyongping and heard from Korean civilians that Japanese cavalry troops were staying in Kwansuping. At dawn on October 22nd, they conducted a raid on the Japanese cavalry troops. The raid operation was a success. The Japanese cavalry troops were annihilated except for 4 men. The largest combat in the Battle of Chingshanli occurred in Yulong Town. The Northern Military Administration Office Army took the advantageous position first and prepared for Japanese attacks. The Japanese forces pushed forward on a scale several times larger than that of the Independence Army. As time went on, the Independence Army began to lose. Then the unified forces led by Hong Bom-do, which won the Battle of Wanlaogu, attacked the rear of the Japanese forces. The strong Japanese forces could not defeat the Independence Army in unison. In this battle, where 2 units attacked in unison, the number of Japanese casualties reached 1,000, and the Independence Army won a great victory. The Battle of Chingshanli was a perfect victory by the Independence Army. From the first Battle of Bangping to the Battle of Tianbaoshan Mountain on October 24th, and later the Battle of Erdu-Songhua River. Overcoming inferior weapons and numerically inferior forces, a lot of heroes sacrificed their lives for one thing: the independence of the motherland. They gave the Korean people the confidence to drive out the Japanese and pass down the spiritual heritage of a continuous independence movement.
Establishment of the Korean Liberation Army.
In Korea's 5,000-year history, it experienced wars large and small and suffered a lot of invasions owing to its geographical location. In old times, the country was called a nation of fortresses, and fortress walls remain as evidence of the ancestors' will to protect the country by preserving Korean territory from enemies. Fortresses are structures built for military or administrative purposes and include attached facilities such as walls and gates. Korea began building fortresses in old times, and the fortresses were developed based on original and systematic techniques. Fortresses are classified according to their purposes and functions into capital fortresses that surrounded palaces and the capital town fortress built to protect local districts, long fortresses built along borders, and mountain fortresses that defended areas using topography.
and according to materials, they are classified into wooden fence, earth, stone, and brick fortresses. Various fortresses were developed according to topographical and regional circumstances, and in Korea, mountain fortresses built for military purposes make up the largest portion. Fortresses were developed in the order of wooden fence fortresses, earth fortresses, stone fortresses, and brick fortresses. Given that the first record of a fortress in Korean history appeared in the Gojoseon period, it is considered that the fortresses were built on the Korean peninsula before the 1st century. The most fortresses were constructed during the Three Kingdoms period, and most of the existing fortresses are from that period. In the Han River area in particular, where fence wars to broader territory occurred, a lot of fortresses were constructed, and most of them were made of earth and stone. During that period, fortresses were built around towns and other fortresses were built in nearby mountains, which were the most common arrangements of fortresses. Mountain fortresses used topographical benefits to protect people and blocked invasions of enemies during times of war, and enabled an effective offense from higher areas. In the Goryeo period, when there were a lot of invasions from Mongolia, mountain fortresses played an outstanding role. When bows and arrows and swords were major weapons, the high fortress walls enabled people to take shelter in emergencies and resist enemy forces for a long time. As artillery and gunpowder emerged as major weapons in the late Goryeo period, a new form of fortress with a variety of defensive facilities was built. The height of the fortress became lower, the walls had curves, and the artillery was installed on each wall. In the late Goryeo period, fortresses became more important because of constant invasions by Red Turbans and Japanese pirates. During that period, the importance of the town fortress as well as the mountain fortress was more pronounced due to invasions by Japanese pirates. For that reason, town fortresses made of earth were rebuilt with stones in the early Joseon period to resist invasion by Japanese pirates. During the reign of King Sejong, people were obliged to install Onsong, Heija, and Jokdae in town fortresses to supplement the shortcomings of being built mostly on low hills and flat lands. Afterwards, fortresses changed a lot due to large-scale wars, the Injun War and the Yongjang-Horan, Jinju-song Fortress and Bunjong Sansong Fortress, where civilians and soldiers fought together against Japan. Sansong Fortress was a place of great suffering from Yongjang-Horan, where Korean ancestors resisted the Qing army after Mongolia. Defenses near the walls of Seoul were reinforced owing to the two large-scale wars. Along with that, original methods were devised for sturdy fortress walls and outstanding defense systems by integrating and developing overseas and domestic techniques. As a result of such efforts, the most advanced fortress in Korean history was built. That is, Suwon Hwasong Fortress, the best among the nation's fortresses. Suwon Hwasong Fortress, constructed according to a thorough plan by King Jeongjo, was the first fortress in Korea to be made of bricks. The fortress was designed by integrating traditional Korean fortification techniques and the West's scientific techniques. Every fortress wall and facility performed both offensive and defensive functions with military and matchlocks installed. Having military practicality and exquisite architectural beauty, the Suwon Hwasong Fortress is considered to be the apex of Korean fortresses. Thus, Korean fortresses continue to evolve along with the history of wars. The forms of fortresses were changed following the development of different weapons. Functions of fortresses were reinforced following the aspects of wars. Korean fortresses were effective in defending against attacks from enemies on highlands, because of the development of mountain fortresses using topography. In addition, Korean fortresses reinforce the function of a natural fortress using rivers and mountains and evolved based on original fortification techniques. These fortresses, which evolved with characteristics unique to Korea and historical sites where the values of ancestors and the spirit of protecting the motherland can be felt.